The lightning split the Montana sky as Madeline Winters stumbled onto her porch, the lantern in her hand swinging wildly. Through the silver sheets of rain, she spotted a figure slumped against her fence post. Her heart lurched. A man, his broad shoulders hunched against the storm, dark liquid mingling with the rainwater streaming down his face. Montana Territory, 1878. Madeline had been alone on this homestead for nearly 2 years since her father's passing. At 23, she'd grown accustomed to handling troubles on her own, but this was different. She set the lantern down and grabbed her father's old shotgun from beside the door. Keeping it pointed downward but ready, she ventured out into the downpour. "Mister?" she called, her voice nearly drowned by thunder. "You all right?" The man's head lifted slightly. Even through the rain, she could see the pain in his eyes. His hat, once probably pristine, hung limply, water cascading off its brim. The dark stain spreading across his shoulder told her everything she needed to know. "Madam," he managed, his voice rough as gravel. "Apologies for trespassing on your property." Madeline made a quick decision. The nearest doctor was in Blackwater Creek, a half-day's ride in good weather. This storm would make it impossible. "Can you walk?" she asked, moving closer. He attempted to stand, only to falter. Madeline rushed forward, tucking herself under his good arm. She was strong from years of working the homestead, but he was a solid man, 6 feet of lean muscle that nearly buckled her knees. "Just leave me," he muttered. "They might be following." "Who might be following?" Madeline asked sharply, but he didn't answer. With considerable effort, she maneuvered him up the porch steps and through her front door. Rain dripped from both of them onto the wooden floor as she guided him to her father's old chair by the hearth. His blood smeared across her sleeve. "Sit down," she commanded when he looked ready to collapse. "You're not going anywhere." His eyes, a striking blue even in the dim lamplight, found hers. "Yes, madam," he said, a ghost of a smile crossing his pain-etched face before he slumped into the chair. Madeline worked quickly. She stoked the fire, put water on to boil, and gathered clean linens. Years of tending to injured livestock and her own mishaps had taught her basic doctoring. "I need to take a look at that wound," she said, returning to his side. "I'm going to help you with your coat and shirt." The stranger nodded weakly. As Madeline helped him out of his drenched coat, she noticed the quality of his clothing beneath the mud and blood. The leather holster at his hip held an ornate Colt revolver. This was no ordinary drifter. "My name's Madeline Winters," she said, carefully cutting away his shirt to reveal a nasty bullet wound in his left shoulder. "Most folks just call me Maddie." "Thomas," he replied through gritted teeth. "Thomas O'Malley." "Well, Mr. O'Malley," she said, inspecting the wound. "Looks like someone wanted you dead." "They still do," he managed, wincing as she began to clean away the blood. "Miss Winters, I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "Trouble found my door all on its own," she replied pragmatically. "And it's just me here, so I'd say you're lucky I know how to use a needle and thread as well as that shotgun." He watched her as she worked, his eyes occasionally closing against the pain. Madeline tried not to notice how handsome he was beneath the dirt and blood-strong jaw covered in stubble, high cheekbones, and those startling blue eyes. His dark hair curled slightly where it had begun to dry near the fire. "The bullet went clean through," she told him. "That's good news. I'm going to have to stitch both sides, though." "Do what you must," he said. Madeline reached for the whiskey bottle she kept for medicinal purposes. She poured some onto a clean rag and dabbed at the wound. Thomas inhaled sharply but made no other sound. "Take a drink," she offered, holding out the bottle. "This will hurt." He accepted the whiskey with his good hand, taking a long pull before handing it back. "Not my first bullet wound," he said. "But much obliged for your kindness." Madeline threaded her needle. "Ready." He nodded, his jaw set. She worked methodically, first on the exit wound in front, then helping him lean forward to address the entry wound on his back. Her fingers were steady, her stitches small and even. Her father had taught her well a woman alone on the frontier needed to be self-sufficient. By the time she finished, Thomas's face had gone pale, but he remained conscious. Madeline wrapped clean bandages around his shoulder and chest, trying to ignore the firm muscle beneath her fingers. "You should rest," she said, stepping back. "You've lost blood." Thomas looked toward the door. "If someone comes—" "I told you," Madeline said firmly. "You're not going anywhere. Not tonight. Not in your condition. Not in this storm." She gestured toward her father's old bedroom. "You can take that room. I'll keep watch." "Miss Winters." "Maddie," she corrected. "And I won't hear arguments. Whatever trouble you're in can wait until morning." Something in her tone must have convinced him. He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Maddie." With her help, Thomas made his way to the bedroom. Madeline provided him with one of her father's old nightshirts, then left him to change while she prepared a simple broth. When she returned with the steaming bowl, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, the two small nightshirts stretched across his broad shoulders. Despite everything, Madeline felt a blush creep across her cheeks. "You should eat something," she said, handing him the bowl. "Then sleep." Thomas accepted the broth gratefully. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." "You can start by telling me who shot you," Madeline replied, sitting in the chair by the bedroom window. Outside, the storm continued to rage, lightning occasionally illuminating the sodden landscape. Thomas sipped the broth before answering. "Men working for Victor Holloway." Madeline's eyes widened. Everyone in the territory knew that name. Holloway owned half the businesses in Blackwater Creek and had been buying up struggling ranches for miles around. "What did you do to cross Holloway?" she asked. Thomas's expression darkened. "I came to deliver a message from the governor. Holloway's been running illegal operations using his businesses to launder money from rustling and worse. The governor sent me to inform him that federal marshals would be arriving next week." "You're a lawman?" Madeline asked. "Special investigator for the territorial government," Thomas confirmed. "Holloway didn't take the news well." He gestured to his shoulder with a grimace. Madeline leaned forward. "So you escaped, and now his men are hunting you?" "Likely, yes." Thomas set the empty bowl aside. "Which is why I need to leave at first light. I can't put you at risk." "And go where, exactly?" Madeline challenged. "In your condition, you wouldn't make it 10 miles. The nearest telegraph office is in Blackwater Creek Holloway's territory." Thomas ran a hand through his damp hair. "There's a U.S. Marshal station in Helena. If I could get word to them, Helena's 3 days' ride." Madeline interrupted. "You need to recover first." Their eyes met across the small room, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Thomas sighed. "One day, then I ride for Helena." "We'll see," Madeline replied, rising from her chair. "Get some sleep, Mr. O'Malley." "Thomas," he corrected softly. "Thank you again, Maddie." Madeline nodded and closed the door behind her. She leaned against it for a moment, her heart pounding inexplicably fast. Then she collected her father's shotgun and settled into the chair near the front window. She wasn't sure what morning would bring, but she knew one thing for certain: the wounded lawman sleeping in her father's bed had just brought a world of complications into her carefully ordered life. The storm subsided sometime before dawn, leaving behind a world washed clean. Madeline had dozed fitfully in the chair, waking at every creak and groan of the old homestead. Now, as the first light of day filtered through the windows, she rose stiffly and put coffee on to boil. Her quiet morning routine was interrupted by a soft thud from her father's bedroom, followed by a muffled curse. She hurried to the door, knocking gently. "Thomas? Are you all right?" When no answer came, she pushed the door open. Thomas was on his feet, attempting to pull on his still damp trousers with one arm, the nightshirt hanging loosely from his wounded shoulder. "What do you think you're doing?" Madeline demanded, hands on her hips. Thomas straightened, wincing at the movement. "Getting dressed. I can see that. Why?" "I told you I need to." Yes, ride to Helena." Madeline interrupted. "In your condition, with one good arm, after losing enough blood to paint my porch? Sit back down before you fall down." Thomas hesitated, clearly torn between dignity and practicality. Practicality won as he lowered himself to the edge of the bed. "Your fever broke in the night," Madeline said, approaching to check his bandages. "That's good, but the wound needs time to heal. You try riding now, you'll tear those stitches and be in worse shape." "I appreciate your concern," Thomas replied, "but every hour I delay puts you at greater risk. If Holloway's men track me here—" "They won't," Madeline said with more confidence than she felt. "The rain washed away any tracks, and my place is off the main trail. Few know it's even here." She examined his shoulder, relieved to find no fresh bleeding. "The bandage needs changing, but it looks clean. Let me get you some breakfast, then we'll talk about what comes next." Thomas watched her with those piercing blue eyes. "You're quite remarkable, Miss Winters." Madeline felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. "I'm practical, Mr. O'Malley. There's a difference." She retreated to the kitchen, busying herself with preparing a simple breakfast of cornbread and eggs. When she returned, Thomas had managed to put on his trousers but left the nightshirt on. They ate in companionable silence until Thomas spoke. "Tell me about your place here." Madeline glanced out the window at her modest homestead. "My father claimed this land 7 years ago. He was chasing a dream, thought we'd build a cattle operation to rival the big spreads down south." "What happened?" "Reality," Madeline said simply. "We didn't have enough capital. Then my father took ill 2 winters ago. Pneumonia. I've kept the place running since then." "All alone?" Thomas asked, his expression somewhere between admiration and concern. "I manage," she replied. "I've got 20 head of cattle, chickens, 2 horses, and enough garden to see me through. It's not the grand ranch my father imagined, but it's mine." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Has Holloway approached you to buy your land?" Madeline's expression hardened. "His man came by 3 months ago. Offered a pittance. I told him my place wasn't for sale at any price." "He won't take no for an answer forever," Thomas warned. "Men like Holloway see only what they want, not what others need." "I know," Madeline admitted, "but this land is all I have left of my father. All I have, period." Thomas seemed about to say more when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both freeze. "Get back," Thomas whispered, reaching for his gun belt hanging nearby. Madeline moved to the window, cautiously peering around the curtain. 2 riders, she reported, coming up from the south trail. Thomas was on his feet instantly, buckling on his gun belt despite his injury. "Holloway's men. They must have found my trail despite the rain." "You don't know that," Madeline argued, though her heart raced. "I do," Thomas replied grimly. "I recognize the Palomino belongs to Holloway's foreman, Silas Reed." Madeline's mind worked quickly. "The root cellar," she said. "Under the kitchen. You can hide there." Thomas shook his head. "I won't hide while you face them. These aren't men who take kindly to being lied to." "Then what do you suggest?" Madeline asked, frustration edging her voice. Thomas peered out the window. "They haven't seen me yet. If I slip out the back, In your condition, Madeline scoffed. You'd make it 10 feet before collapsing. The riders were drawing closer. Madeline made a split-second decision. Get in the bedroom. Let me handle this. Before Thomas could protest, she hurried to the front door, shotgun in hand. She stepped onto the porch just as the riders approached her fence line. "Morning, gentlemen," she called, keeping the shotgun visible but pointed down. "Something I can help you with?" The lead rider, a lean man with a weathered face and cold eyes, reined in his palomino. "Morning, miss. Name's Silas Reed. This here's Barton. We're looking for a man. Might have come this way." Madeline kept her expression neutral. "Don't get many visitors out here. What's this man look like?" "Tall fella," Reed replied, his eyes scanning the homestead. "Dark hair, city clothes. Would have been injured shot in the shoulder." Madeline shook her head. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description. Last traveler through here was a peddler, week before last." Reed exchanged glances with his companion. "Mind if we take a look around? Just to be thorough." "I mind very much," Madeline replied, her grip tightening on the shotgun. "This is private property, Mr. Reed. Unless you have some legal authority, I'd thank you to state your business and move along." Reed's expression darkened. "Now, Miss Winters," she supplied. "Miss Winters," Reed continued, a false smile stretching his thin lips. "We don't mean any trouble, but this man we're looking for, he's dangerous. A thief and a liar. Mr. Holloway's just looking to recover some property that was stolen. As I said, I haven't seen him," Madeline repeated firmly, "and I have work to attend to." Reed studied her for a long moment. "You sure about that? Lying to protect a criminal could get a woman alone out here in a heap of trouble." The threat wasn't subtle. Madeline raised the shotgun slightly. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Reed? Because that would be unwise." The second man, Barton, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Come on, Silas. She ain't seen him." Reed ignored his companion, his eyes locked on Madeline. "We'll be back, Miss Winters. You think on what I said." He turned his horse, then added over his shoulder, "Hollow's offering a reward for information about this fella. $50. Keep that in mind if you do happen to see him." Madeline watched them ride away, maintaining her composed stance until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did she lower the shotgun, her hands suddenly trembling. When she returned inside, Thomas was standing in the doorway to her father's bedroom, his gun drawn. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. "Reed is a dangerous man." "So it seems," Madeline replied, setting the shotgun aside. "But I don't take kindly to threats on my own property." Thomas holstered his revolver with a grimace. "They'll be back, and with more men." "Probably," Madeline agreed. "Which means we need a plan." "We?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Yes, we," Madeline said firmly. "Unless you plan to leave me to deal with Holloway's men when they return, because they will return whether you're here or not. They've decided I'm involved now." Thomas considered this, then nodded slowly. "You're right. I've dragged you into this mess. I won't abandon you to face it alone." The admission seemed to cost him, and Madeline realized he was a man unaccustomed to accepting help, especially from a woman. "Good," she said briskly. "Then we need to get a message to your marshals in Helena." Thomas shook his head. "Even if we could, they wouldn't arrive in time. Reed won't wait 3 days." "Then what do you suggest?" Thomas paced the small room, wincing occasionally when he moved too quickly. "I have evidence against Holloway in my saddlebags documents linking him to rustling operations across the territory, witness statements about his strong-arm tactics." "And where are these saddlebags?" Madeline asked. "That's the problem," Thomas admitted. "My horse bolted when Reed and his men ambushed me. Last I saw, she was heading north, toward Blackwater Creek. Madeline sank into a chair. So your evidence is either lost in the wilderness or worse, back in Holloway's hands. Not necessarily, Thomas said. My mare is smart, she knows her way back to the livery in town. If she made it there, then your saddlebags might still be with her, Madeline finished. But that means going into Blackwater Creek, right under Holloway's nose. I'll go, Thomas declared. Madeline laughed without humor. You can barely dress yourself, and every man in Holloway's employ knows your face. No, if anyone's going to Blackwater Creek, it's me. Absolutely not, Thomas protested. It's too dangerous. I go to Blackwater Creek regularly for supplies, Madeline countered. No one will look twice at me. Besides, Reed doesn't know I'm hiding you. As far as he's concerned, I'm just a stubborn homesteader who wouldn't let him search my property. Thomas studied her, clearly conflicted. If something happened to you because of me, nothing will happen, Madeline assured him. I'll ride in tomorrow for supplies, check the livery, and be back before sundown. She stood, her decision made. And tonight, we'll prepare for whatever comes after. Thomas held her gaze for a long moment. You're either the bravest or the most foolhardy woman I've ever met, Madeline Winters. Despite everything, Madeline smiled. My father always said I was both. For the rest of the day, they prepared. Thomas's condition improved enough that he could help Madeline reinforce the cabin's defenses, checking sightlines, identifying potential cover, and planning escape routes if needed. As they worked, Madeline learned more about the man she'd taken in. Thomas O'Malley had grown up in Boston, the son of Irish immigrants. After serving in the war between the states, he'd gone west and eventually found work with the territorial government, investigating land disputes and criminal enterprises that local law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't touch. How did you end up investigating Holloway? Madeline asked as they shared a simple supper that evening. Complaints kept coming in, Thomas explained. Small ranchers being forced off their land, businesses in town mysteriously burning down when they wouldn't sell to Holloway. But the local sheriff is in Holloway's pocket, so nothing was done. Until you arrived, Madeline noted. Thomas nodded. The governor received a petition signed by 24 local citizens. He sent me to investigate discreetly. I spent 3 weeks gathering evidence, posing as a land speculator. And Holloway discovered your true purpose. Someone tipped him off, Thomas confirmed. I was summoned to his office, where he offered me a bribe to falsify my report. When I refused, he signaled Reed. I managed to escape, but not before catching a bullet. Madeline considered this. If Holloway is as powerful as you say, won't he just bribe the marshals when they arrive? Not these marshals, Thomas said with certainty. The governor's sending his most trusted men. But without my evidence, they'll have a harder time building a case that will stick. As night fell, they completed their preparations. Thomas insisted on taking the first watch, despite Madeline's concerns about his injury. I've endured worse with less rest, he told her. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day. Reluctantly, Madeline retired to her bedroom, leaving Thomas seated by the window with his revolver close at hand. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. The events of the past 24 hours had upended her quiet existence, bringing danger and something else, something she wasn't ready to name, into her life. When she woke just before dawn, she found Thomas still at his post, his eyes alert despite the long night. You should have woken me for my watch, she scolded gently. I wasn't tired, he replied, though the shadows under his eyes suggested otherwise. How do you plan to go about your business in town? As Madeline prepared for her journey, they refined their strategy. She would claim to need supplies after the storm had damaged her roof, a reasonable excuse that wouldn't raise suspicions. While in town, she would casually inquire at the livery about any stray horses brought in recently. "If my mare is there, her saddlebags should still be attached," Thomas explained. "There's a false bottom in the right bag. That's where I keep the most damning evidence." "And if she's not at the livery?" Madeline asked, pulling on her riding coat. "Then we need a new plan," Thomas admitted. "But let's hope it doesn't come to that." As Madeline prepared to leave, Thomas caught her hand. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Be careful," he said, his blue eyes intense. "If anything seems wrong, anything at all, just leave. We'll find another way." Madeline nodded, strangely touched by his concern. "I'll be back before sundown." "If you're not," Thomas said seriously, "I'll come looking for you, injured shoulder or not." "That won't be necessary," Madeline assured him, pulling her hand gently from his. "But thank you." The ride to Blackwater Creek took just over 2 hours. As Madeline approached the small frontier town, she schooled her features into a mask of casual indifference. Just another local coming to town for supplies, nothing more. The main street was busy with the usual morning traffic, wagons delivering goods, cowboys lounging outside the saloon despite the early hour, and ladies making their rounds of the shops. Madeline tethered her horse outside the general store, then made her way toward the livery at the end of the street. Heart pounding despite her outward calm, she entered the dim stable. The familiar smells of hay, horse, and leather filled the air. "Morning, Miss Winters," called Jake, the stable master's son. "Wasn't expecting to see you in town so soon after that storm." "Lost some roof shingles," Madeline replied casually. "Needed to get replacements before the next rain." Jake nodded sympathetically. "Been busy with similar repairs ourselves. Half the town got damaged somehow." Madeline glanced around the livery, noting several horses in the stalls. "Looks like you've got a full house." Including a stray that turned up yesterday," Jake said. "Pretty little bay mare with no rider. Has a fancy saddle, though. Figure the owner will come looking soon enough." Madeline's heart leapt, but she kept her voice even. "A bay mare, you say? Anyone claim her yet?" "Not yet. Mr. Holloway's men were asking about her, though. Said they'd be back this afternoon." Madeline moved toward the stall where a beautiful bay mare stood quietly. The horse had Thomas's saddlebags still attached to the saddle hanging nearby. "She's a beauty," Madeline commented. "Smart too, finding her way to town." Jake agreed. "Wish all strays were so well-mannered." "You thinking of buying another horse, Miss Winters?" Madeline shook her head. "Can't afford it right now. Just admiring is all." She needed a plan quickly. Holloway's men would return soon, and the evidence Thomas needed would be lost. An idea formed, risky but possible. "Jake, I wonder if I might trouble you for a favor," she began. "My wagon wheel's been wobbling something terrible. Could you take a look while I finish my shopping? I'd be happy to pay for your time." The young man straightened proudly. "No need for payment, Miss Winters. Happy to help." "Perfect." As soon as Jake left to examine her non-existent will problem, Madeline moved swiftly. She approached the bay mare, speaking softly to calm her. The horse seemed to recognize something in her voice or scent, perhaps detecting Thomas on her clothes, and remained calm as Madeline quickly opened the right saddlebag. Just as Thomas had described, there was a cleverly designed false bottom. Madeline extracted the documents hidden there, tucking them securely inside her coat. She had just replaced the saddlebag when she heard voices approaching. Quickly, she moved to another stall, pretending to examine a dapple gray horse as Jake returned, accompanied by an older man Madeline recognized as Mr. Peterson from the hardware store. "Will looks fine to me, Miss Winters," Jake reported, looking confused. "Does it?" Madeline feigned surprise. That's strange. Well, thank you for checking. I'd better finish my errands before heading back. She nodded politely to Mr. Peterson and made her way out of the livery, fighting the urge to run. The documents felt like they were burning against her side, but she maintained her casual pace as she crossed to the general store. Madeline made a show of purchasing roof shingles, nails, and a few other supplies that supported her story. As she loaded them onto her horse, she spotted Silas Reed and two other men riding down the main street toward the livery. Time to leave. She mounted her horse and set off at a deliberate trot, resisting the temptation to gallop until she was well out of town. Only when Blackwater Creek had disappeared behind her did she urge her horse to a faster pace. The return journey felt interminable, each minute stretching as she wondered if she was being followed. But no riders appeared on the trail behind her, and by mid-afternoon, she crested the final ridge that overlooked her homestead. Relief washed over her at the sight of her cabin, still standing peacefully in the afternoon sun. As she approached, the door opened, and Thomas stepped onto the porch, revolver in hand. When he recognized her, his entire posture changed, relief evident in every line of his body. "You made it," he said simply as she dismounted. "I did better than that," Madeline replied, reaching into her coat to extract the documents. "I found your mare and your evidence." Thomas's eyes widened. He took the papers with reverent care. "Madeline, you're extraordinary." The way he said her name made something flutter in her chest, but there was no time to dwell on it. "Holloway's men were asking about your horse," she reported. "They were heading to the livery as I left town. They'll know soon enough that someone took the documents." Thomas nodded grimly. "Then we need to prepare. They'll be coming." As they secured the cabin, Thomas examined the recovered documents. "It's all here," he confirmed. "Witness testimonies, financial records showing the money trail from rustling operations, even a signed confession from one of Holloway's former men." "Will it be enough?" Madeline asked. "More than enough," Thomas assured her. "If we can get this to the marshals in Helena." The unspoken question hung between them. How to get the evidence to Helena when Holloway's men would be hunting them both now? "We could ride out tonight," Madeline suggested. "Take different trails. Increase our chances." Thomas shook his head. "Too risky in the dark, especially with Reed knowing these hills better than we do. Our best chance is to defend this position until morning, then make a break for it." Madeline nodded slowly. "All right, we hold here tonight." As the afternoon waned into evening, they prepared for the coming confrontation. Thomas, though still favoring his injured shoulder, moved with increasing strength. They positioned furniture for cover, loaded extra ammunition, and placed lanterns strategically. "You're good at this," Thomas observed as Madeline efficiently prepared defensive positions. "My father taught me," she explained. "Said a woman alone needs to know how to protect what's hers." Thomas regarded her thoughtfully. "He raised a remarkable daughter." Madeline felt herself blush and turned away to hide it. "We should eat while we can," she said practically. "No telling when we'll get another chance." They shared a quiet meal, both aware it might be their last peaceful moment for some time. As darkness fell, they extinguished the lamps inside the cabin, leaving only the faint glow of embers from the fireplace. Thomas took position by the front window, while Madeline watched the rear approach. For hours, nothing disturbed the stillness of the night except the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant howl of a coyote. "Maybe they won't come tonight," Madeline whispered hopefully around midnight. "They'll come," Thomas replied softly. "Reed's not the type to wait." His prediction proved accurate. Just after 2 in the morning, Madeline spotted movement at the edge of her property, dark figures moving through the moonlight toward the cabin. "Thomas," she called softly. Southeast corner, near the old oak. He moved silently to her side, peering through the window. I count 4 men, he murmured. Reed, Barton, and 2 others. Only 4, Madeline asked, surprised. Holloway wouldn't want to draw attention by sending a small army, Thomas explained. He'd rather this look like a private dispute, not an outright attack. They watched as the men spread out, encircling the cabin. What's our play? Madeline asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. We wait, Thomas replied. Let them make the first move. We have the defensive position. They didn't have to wait long. A voice called out from the darkness. Silas Reed. Miss Winters, we know you're in there and we know who you're hiding. Send O'Malley out, and there won't be any trouble for you. Madeline and Thomas exchanged glances. Should I answer? She whispered. Thomas nodded. Keep him talking. The longer they stay exposed, the better our position. Madeline raised her voice. Mr. Reed, it's the middle of the night. Whatever business you have can wait until morning. A harsh laugh answered her. I'm afraid this business is urgent, Miss Winters. Your guest stole some property belonging to Mr. Holloway. Return it now, and you can both ride out of here. We both know that's a lie, Thomas muttered. Madeline called back. There's been a misunderstanding, Mr. Reed. I have no stolen property here. Then you won't mind if we search the place, Reed replied. Just to be certain. Before Madeline could respond, a gunshot cracked through the night. The window beside them shattered, sending glass flying. Get down! Thomas pulled Madeline to the floor as more shots followed. The initial volley was brief, meant to frighten rather than kill, Thomas explained as they crawled to better positions. They want us alive if possible, he told her. Holloway will want to know who else has seen the evidence. What now? Madeline asked, clutching her shotgun. We hold position, Thomas replied. They'll likely try to flush us out, maybe set fire to the cabin. We need to prevent that. For the next hour, a tense stalemate ensued. Occasional shots were exchanged, but Reed's men remained at a distance, unwilling to rush the cabin where 2 armed defenders waited. Then Madeline smelled smoke. Thomas, she hissed. They're trying to smoke us out. They discovered the source, a smoldering bundle of rags pushed against the back wall of the cabin. Thomas doused it with water before it could catch properly, but it was clear their situation was deteriorating. We can't stay here, he said grimly. They'll keep trying until the cabin burns. Madeline thought quickly. The root cellar. It has a tunnel my father dug that comes out near the creek bed. We could escape that way. Thomas's eyes widened. Why didn't you mention this before? Because it's unfinished, Madeline admitted. The tunnel's narrow and unstable in places. I haven't used it in years. Another volley of shots hit the cabin, one splintering the doorframe inches from where they crouched. Sounds better than burning, Thomas decided. Where's the entrance? Madeline led him to the kitchen, where she pulled back a rag rug to reveal a trapdoor. As quietly as possible, they gathered the evidence, documents, ammunition, and a few essential supplies. I'll go first, Madeline said, lifting the heavy door. Follow close behind me. The root cellar was cool and earthy, lined with shelves of preserved foods. At the back, partially hidden behind a barrel, was a rough-hewn opening barely large enough for a person to crawl through. My father started digging it during the Indian troubles a few years back, Madeline explained in a whisper. Wanted an escape route if the cabin was ever surrounded. Thomas nodded appreciatively. Smart man. Madeline lit a small lantern, keeping the flame low. It's about 50 yards to the exit. Stay close, there are a couple of tight spots. With that, she got on her hands and knees and entered the tunnel, Thomas following behind. The passageway was just as she remembered, narrow, with dirt walls reinforced occasionally by wooden supports. In places, they had to wriggle on their bellies to pass through. For Thomas, with his wounded shoulder, the journey was clearly agonizing. Madeline could hear his stifled grunts of pain, but he never asked to stop. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, they reached the end of the tunnel. A crude wooden door, covered with brush on the outside, blocked the exit. "We'll be exposed briefly when we emerge," Madeline warned. "The creek bed is about 20 yards to the right. If we can reach it, the bank will provide cover." Thomas nodded, sweat beading his forehead despite the cool underground air. "Let's go." Madeline carefully pushed open the exit door, peering out. The night was quiet, the moon providing just enough light to navigate by. No sign of Reed or his men. "Clear," she whispered. One by one, they emerged from the tunnel into the cool night air. Crouching low, they moved toward the creek bed, every sense alert for danger. They had almost reached the protective embankment when a shout rang out behind them. "There they are!" Gunfire erupted, bullets kicking up dirt around their feet. "Run!" Thomas shouted, drawing his revolver and returning fire. They sprinted the final yards to the creek bed, sliding down the embankment just as a volley of shots passed overhead. The creek itself was shallow but provided decent cover as they crouched in its bed. "Are you hit?" Thomas asked urgently, checking Madeline for injuries. "No, I'm fine," she assured him. "You?" "Nothing new," he replied grimly. "But we're pinned down." More shots rang out, keeping them pressed against the muddy creek bank. "We need a diversion," Madeline said, thinking rapidly. "My horse is tethered in the small corral behind the barn. If we could reach her, too exposed." Thomas objected. "They'd cut us down before we made it halfway." Madeline's mind raced. The old miner's trail runs alongside this creek for about a mile. If we follow it east, we could circle around to the north ridge. There's enough cover there to make our way toward Helena. Thomas considered this. How far to the ridge? 3 miles, maybe 4, Madeline estimated. But the trail is overgrown in places hard to follow in the dark. A bullet splashed into the creek inches from where they huddled. Better than staying here to be shot, Thomas decided. Lead the way. Staying low in the creek bed, they began making their way eastward. The water was cold, soaking their boots and pants, but it provided concealment as they moved. Behind them, Reed and his men continued firing sporadically at their last known position. "They don't know we're moving," Thomas whispered. "That gives us a head start." For nearly an hour, they sloshed through the shallow creek, stopping occasionally to listen for pursuers. Eventually, Madeline signaled a spot where they could climb out. "The miner's trail starts here," she said, pointing to a barely visible path winding through the scrub pine. As they pulled themselves from the creek, Thomas stumbled, his face contorting in pain. His bandages had soaked through not with water, but with fresh blood. "You're bleeding again," Madeline said with alarm. "The crawling reopened the wound," Thomas admitted, his voice tight. "I'll be fine." Madeline didn't believe him, but there was no time to argue. Already, they could hear voices in the distance. Reed and his men had discovered their escape and were following the creek. The miner's trail was exactly as Madeline had described, overgrown and difficult to follow, especially in the darkness. They moved as quickly as Thomas's condition would allow, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. By the time dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they had reached the base of the North Ridge. Thomas's condition had deteriorated. He moved slowly, his face pale and drawn. "We need to rest," Madeline insisted, guiding him to a sheltered hollow formed by a fallen tree. "No time," Thomas argued weakly. "Reed knows these hills. He'll find our trail soon enough. You won't make it much farther without rest," Madeline countered firmly. Just a few minutes to check your wound and eat something. Reluctantly, Thomas agreed. As Madeline unwrapped his bandages, she bit her lip to prevent a gasp. The wound had indeed reopened, the stitches torn by their strenuous escape. "It's bad, isn't it?" Thomas asked, reading her expression. "I've seen worse," Madeline lied, using a clean handkerchief to apply pressure. "But we need to stop the bleeding." She worked quickly, using strips torn from her petticoat to rebandage the wound. Thomas watched her, his blue eyes fever-bright. "Why are you doing all this?" he asked softly. "You could have turned me in, claimed the reward, or just sent me on my way when Reed first came looking." Madeline's hands stilled momentarily. "Would you have done any differently in my place?" "Most would," Thomas replied. "Self-preservation is a powerful instinct. So is doing what's right," Madeline said simply, finishing the bandage. Thomas caught her hand. "Thank you, Madeline Winters. Whatever happens, know that the crack of a rifle interrupted him. A bullet splintered the log above their heads. "There they are," Reed's voice called. "Don't let them reach the ridge." Thomas was on his feet instantly, pulling Madeline up. "Run. I'll cover you." "Not without you," she insisted, gripping his arm. More shots rang out. There was no time to argue. Together, they sprinted toward the ridge, zigzagging between trees and boulders to present difficult targets. The ridge loomed before them, its steep slope covered with pine trees and loose shale. Climbing it would be challenging even without pursuers firing at their backs. "Up there," Thomas gasped, pointing to a rocky outcropping about halfway up. "We can make a stand if necessary." The climb was brutal. Loose stones slid beneath their feet, threatening to send them tumbling backward. Thomas struggled visibly, his wounded arm nearly useless, but he pushed onward through sheer determination. Behind them, Reed and his men had reached the base of the ridge and begun their own ascent. Occasionally, one would stop to fire upward, but the distance and cover made accurate shooting nearly impossible. Finally, they reached the outcropping Thomas had indicated, a natural fortress of jumbled boulders that provided excellent cover. "We hold here," Thomas decided, his breathing labored. "They'll have to come at us one at a time up that narrow approach." Madeline checked their ammunition. Her shotgun had 5 shells remaining. Thomas's revolver had 4 bullets. "Not much to work with," she noted grimly. "We don't need to win," Thomas replied. "Just delay them until nightfall. Then we can continue toward Helena under cover of darkness." Reed's voice floated up from below. "O'Malley, this is your last chance. Throw down those papers and your weapons, and you both walk away." Thomas and Madeline exchanged glances. They both knew it was a lie. "What do you think, Miss Winters?" Thomas asked, a ghost of a smile on his pale face. "Shall we accept his generous offer?" Despite everything, Madeline felt a laugh bubble up. "I think Mr. Reed can go to hell." Thomas's smile widened. "My thoughts exactly." He called down, "Sorry, Reed. We'll take our chances up here." A volley of curses was the only response, followed by renewed gunfire. The standoff had begun. For hours they defended their position. Reed's men attempted several advances up the slope, only to be driven back by well-placed shots from Thomas and Madeline. Their ammunition dwindled, each shot had to count. As the sun began to descend toward the western horizon, Thomas's condition worsened. The fever had returned, and he shivered despite the warmth of the day. "Thomas," Madeline said urgently, "you need a doctor." He shook his head stubbornly. "Not until those documents reach Helena. They won't do any good if you die before delivering them," she argued. Thomas fixed her with an intense gaze. "Promise me something, Madeline. If I don't make it, you'll get these papers to Marshal Dawson in Helena. Promise me." "I promise," she replied, her throat tight. "But it won't come to that." A shout from below interrupted them. But it wasn't Reed's voice this time, it was new, unfamiliar. "Holloway's men. Drop your weapons. You're surrounded." Thomas and Madeline peered cautiously over their rocky shelter. At the base of the ridge, a group of mounted men had appeared, at least a dozen, all wearing badges. "Marshals!" Thomas breathed in disbelief. The marshals from Helena. Indeed, Reed and his remaining men were being disarmed and bound by the newcomers. One man, distinguished by his bearing and the quality of his horse, began ascending the ridge toward their position. "O'Malley," he called. "Thomas O'Malley? Are you up there?" "Marshal Dawson," Thomas called back, recognition in his voice. "We're here." Relief washed over Madeline in a dizzying wave. They were saved. Within the hour, they were safely in the marshal's camp established at the base of the ridge. A doctor had been summoned from the nearest town to attend to Thomas, while Reed and his men were securely bound and under guard. "How did you find us?" Thomas asked Marshal Dawson as his wound was being treated. "Governor sent word you'd gone missing," Dawson explained. "We were already en route when we came across a homestead burning on the plain below. Figured it might be connected." Madeline's heart sank. "My home? They burned my home." Dawson nodded grimly. "I'm sorry, madam. Not much left standing by the time we spotted it. Everything she owned, everything she had built with her father gone." Madeline felt numb with the realization. Thomas reached for her hand. "Madeline, I'm so sorry. This is my fault." She shook her head, fighting back tears. "It's Holloway's fault. And Reed's." "Speaking of Holloway," Dawson interjected, "those documents you recovered will put him away for a long time. We've already sent men to Blackwater Creek to take him into custody." Thomas nodded tiredly. "Good. That's good." The doctor finished rebandaging Thomas's shoulder. "He needs rest," he announced, "and proper care in a real infirmary. That wound's been through too much." "We'll take him to Helena," Dawson decided. "Both of you. You'll be safe there while this business with Holloway is concluded." As the marshals prepared to move out, Thomas insisted on riding beside Madeline despite the doctor's protests. "I'm sorry about your home," he said quietly as they followed the marshal's party. Madeline gazed back at the distant plume of smoke that marked where her cabin had stood. "It was just a place," she said, though her heart ached. "It can be rebuilt." "I'll help you rebuild it," Thomas promised. "When this is over." Madeline looked at him, surprised. "You have duties elsewhere, I'm sure." "None more important than this," he replied seriously. "Madeline, what you did taking in a stranger bleeding on your doorstep, risking everything to help me, I can never repay that." "I don't want repayment," Madeline said softly. "What do you want?" Thomas asked. The question caught her off guard. What did she want? For so long, her only goal had been survival, maintaining her father's homestead, keeping herself fed and sheltered. But now, "I don't know yet," she answered honestly. "But I'd like the chance to figure it out." Thomas nodded slowly. "I'd like to be there when you do." Something passed between them then, an understanding, a possibility. Despite the loss of her home, despite the danger they'd faced, Madeline felt a curious lightness. The future, for the first time in years, held something more than mere survival. "I'd like that too," she said. The journey to Helena took 3 days. Thomas's condition stabilized under proper care, though he remained weak from blood loss and infection. Madeline stayed by his side, learning the details of Holloway's operation as Marshal Dawson explained them. Holloway had been building a criminal empire for years, buying legitimate businesses as fronts for cattle rustling, extortion, and land fraud. Many local officials had been in his pocket, making prosecution nearly impossible until Thomas's investigation. The governor's sending a new sheriff to Blackwater Creek. Dawson told them on the final day of their journey. Clean things up proper like. What about the people Holloway forced out? Madeline asked. Will they get their land back? Those still living, yes, Dawson confirmed. Court orders are being prepared. It'll take time, but justice will be done. Thomas, riding beside them, added, including for you, Madeline. Holloway's assets will be seized. There will be compensation for your losses. Madeline nodded, though money couldn't replace everything she'd lost. Her father's few possessions, the home they'd built together, those were irreplaceable. As they crested a hill, Helena came into view, a sprawling frontier city, larger than any Madeline had seen before. Unlike the rough and tumble atmosphere of Blackwater Creek, Helena boasted proper streets, substantial buildings, and signs of civilized society. Welcome to the territorial capital, Dawson announced proudly. The next week passed in a blur. Thomas was installed in the territorial infirmary to recover properly, while Madeline was provided lodging in a respectable boarding house for ladies. She gave her testimony about the events at her homestead to official scribes, signed documents, and began the process of claiming compensation for her property. Each afternoon, she visited Thomas in the infirmary. His recovery was steady but slow. The combination of the bullet wound, subsequent blood loss, and their arduous escape had taken a toll on his body. The doctor says I can leave next week, he told her one afternoon as they sat in the infirmary garden. Light duties only for a while, but I'm mending. That's wonderful, Madeline replied sincerely. What will you do next? Another assignment from the governor. Thomas hesitated. Actually, I've been offered the sheriff's position in Blackwater Creek. Madeline's eyes widened. And will you take it? I'm considering it, he admitted. The town needs honest leadership after Holloway's influence, and it would mean, he paused, looking at her intently, it would mean I'd be close to your homestead, if you decide to rebuild. Madeline felt her heartbeat quicken. You meant what you said about helping me rebuild? Every word, Thomas assured her. If that's what you want. She considered this. The past weeks had changed something fundamental within her. The isolation she'd grown accustomed to on her homestead now seemed less appealing than it once had. I'm not sure yet, she said honestly. Part of me wants to start fresh somewhere new. But that land, it was my father's dream. Our dream. Thomas nodded, understanding. You don't need to decide right away. The offer of help stands, whatever you choose. Their conversations over the following days ranged widely from their childhoods to their hopes for the future. Madeline learned of Thomas's family back east, his experiences during the war, and his journey west seeking purpose. In turn, she shared stories of her father, their struggles and triumphs on the frontier, and her life before Thomas had stumbled bleeding onto her property. With each visit, each conversation, the connection between them deepened. Neither spoke of it directly, but both felt it growing. On the day Thomas was released from the infirmary, Madeline met him at the entrance. He stood straighter than she'd ever seen him, clean-shaven and dressed in a new suit provided by the territorial government. You look well, she observed, smiling. I feel well, he replied. Better than I have in weeks. He offered her his arm. Would you join me for dinner? I've made reservations at the hotel restaurant. The evening that followed was unlike any in Madeline's experience. The hotel restaurant was elegant by frontier standards, with real tablecloths, polished silverware, and a menu that offered more than the simple fare she was accustomed to. Thomas proved to be charming company, attentive and considerate. Over dessert, a slice of apple pie that reminded Madeline of her mother's recipe. Thomas cleared his throat nervously. I've accepted the sheriff's position in Blackwater Creek, he announced. I leave next week. Madeline felt a conflicting surge of happiness and disappointment. Congratulations, she said sincerely. They're fortunate to have you. Thank you. Thomas hesitated, then reached across the table to take her hand. Madeline, these past weeks, getting to know you properly. It's been the most unexpected blessing of my life. Her heart fluttered at his touch, at his words. For me as well, she admitted softly. I know it's sudden, Thomas continued, and perhaps improper to speak of such things so soon, but life on the frontier has taught me not to waste time when someone matters. He took a deep breath. I care for you, Madeline Winters, deeply. I believe we could build something meaningful together, if you were willing. Madeline felt a warmth spreading through her chest. For so long, she'd been focused solely on survival, on maintaining her independence in a harsh land. The idea of partnership, of sharing her life, was both frightening and exhilarating. I care for you too, Thomas, she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. But I need time to figure out what I want, where I belong now. Thomas nodded, squeezing her hand gently. I understand. There's no rush. I'll be in Blackwater Creek when you're ready if you're ready. The following morning, Madeline received word that her compensation claim had been approved. The territorial government would provide funds for rebuilding her homestead, as well as additional money for the livestock lost in the fire. It's more than fair, the clerk told her as she signed the papers. The governor's orders. You helped bring down Holloway's operation at great personal risk. With the financial matter settled, Madeline faced a decision. She could rebuild on her father's land, start fresh elsewhere in the territory, or perhaps even return east to the civilization she barely remembered from childhood. She spent days walking the streets of Helena, considering her options. The city offered amenities she'd lived without for years: shops with fine goods, restaurants, a lending library, even a small theater. The company of other women was a novelty after her isolated existence. Yet something was missing. The wide open spaces, the connection to the land, the sense of building something meaningful with her own hands. These things called to her. And increasingly there was Thomas. Though he had departed for Blackwater Creek to assume his duties, his absence only clarified her feelings. She missed his quiet strength, his integrity, the way his blue eyes crinkled when he smiled. 1 week after Thomas left for Blackwater Creek, Madeline made her decision. She purchased supplies, hired a wagon and driver, and set out for her homestead. The journey felt like a homecoming, despite the uncertainty ahead. When they crested the final hill overlooking her property, Madeline asked the driver to stop. The sight below brought tears to her eyes. Where her cabin had stood was now a blackened rectangle of ash and debris. The barn was partially standing but badly damaged. Her garden was trampled, the fence broken. Yet the land itself remained: the rolling hills, the creek where she'd drawn water, the oak tree her father had built a swing in when they first arrived. This was still home, despite everything. Take me down, please, she instructed the driver. As they approached what remained of her cabin, Madeline noticed something unexpected: fresh lumber stacked neatly nearby, and the beginnings of a foundation already laid out. Looks like someone started rebuilding for you, miss, the driver observed. Madeline's heart leapt. Could it be? As if in answer to her unspoken question, a rider appeared on the trail from Blackwater Creek. Even at a distance, she recognized Thomas's straight posture and the distinctive way he sat a horse. He spotted her wagon and urged his mount forward, closing the distance between them quickly. When he reined in, his face split into a wide smile. Madeline, he said, dismounting. I was hoping you'd come. She climbed down from the wagon, suddenly shy despite everything they'd been through together. I see you've been busy, she said, gesturing toward the lumber and foundation. Thomas shrugged, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. I made a promise to help rebuild. Thought I'd get a head start during my off hours. All the way from town? Madeline asked, knowing it was nearly an hour's ride each way. Worth the journey, he replied simply. In that moment, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right decision. I've been thinking, she said, stepping closer to him, about what I want for my future. Thomas waited, his expression hopeful but restrained. I want this land, Madeline continued. My father's dream. But I don't want to be alone anymore. She took a deep breath. If your offer still stands. Thomas reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. It does. It always will. Then I accept, Madeline said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. We'll build something here together. Thomas's smile was brighter than she'd ever seen it. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle, reverent, a promise in itself. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. When I rode onto your property that night, bleeding and half dead, I never imagined I'd found not just shelter, but a future. And I never imagined that taking in a wounded stranger would lead to this, Madeline replied with a soft laugh. Funny how life works. Indeed it is, Miss Winters, Thomas agreed, his blue eyes twinkling. Indeed it is. In the weeks that followed, they rebuilt the cabin together. Thomas rode out from town whenever his duties allowed, and local folks grateful for his role in bringing down Holloway often came to help. What had once been Madeline's solitary struggle became a community effort. By the first snowfall, the new cabin was complete larger than the original, with proper glass windows and a stone hearth. The barn had been repaired, new chickens acquired, and a small herd of cattle purchased to replace those lost. On a crisp December morning, with snow dusting the Montana landscape, Thomas and Madeline were married in the Blackwater Creek Church. The townspeople turned out in force for the celebration. The new sheriff and the courageous woman who had helped free their community from Holloway's grip had become local heroes. After the ceremony, Thomas drove Madeline home in a new wagon, his wedding gift to her. As they approached the cabin, now decorated with pine boughs and ribbons for the Christmas season, he drew the horses to a stop. What is it? Madeline asked. Thomas smiled mysteriously. I have one more surprise. He nodded toward the barn. Curious, Madeline allowed him to lead her there. Inside, in the freshly built stall, stood a familiar bay mare. Your horse, Madeline exclaimed. Our horse now, Thomas corrected. I thought it fitting. If not for her finding her way back to town that day, things might have ended very differently. Madeline stroked the mare's velvety nose. She deserves a name, then. I was thinking Providence, Thomas suggested. It means divine guidance, Madeline finished, smiling up at him. It's perfect. Thomas drew her into his arms. Do you know what today is, besides our wedding day? Madeline thought for a moment, then realized. It's been exactly 6 months since you stumbled onto my property. The luckiest day of my life, Thomas murmured, kissing her forehead. When you found me dripping with rain and blood, and ordered me to sit down, and told you that you weren't going anywhere, Madeline added with a laugh. I'm glad I listened, Thomas said softly. So am I, Madeline replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him properly. So am I. As the year turned and seasons passed, the O'Malley homestead flourished. Thomas continued his duties as sheriff, bringing law and justice to a region long accustomed to corruption. Madeline expanded their cattle operation, applying the knowledge her father had instilled and developing new techniques of her own. Together, they built something neither could have achieved alone: a home, a prosperous ranch, and eventually a family. Their first child, a daughter they named Catherine after Thomas's mother, arrived the following winter. A son, James, named for Madeline's father, followed 2 years later. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and they sat together on the porch watching the Montana sunset, they sometimes spoke of that stormy night of a wounded man who found not just shelter but salvation, and of a solitary woman who discovered that the strongest fence was the one around her heart. Life on the frontier remained challenging, with droughts and blizzards, economic hardships and occasional threats from those who resented the law Thomas represented. But they faced each challenge together, drawing strength from the bond forged in those desperate days of flight and pursuit. In later years, when Catherine and James were old enough to understand, Thomas and Madeline shared the story of how they met, of providence and courage, of choices made and a future forged against the odds. "Your mother," Thomas would tell the children with admiration in his voice, "is the bravest person I've ever known. She took in a stranger bleeding on her doorstep, stood against dangerous men, and helped bring justice to this territory. And your father," Madeline would add, her hand finding Thomas's, "taught me that sometimes the greatest strength is in trusting another person with your heart." As Blackwater Creek grew from a rough frontier town into a proper community with a school, a church, and honest government, the O'Malleys remained at its heart, Thomas as its longest-serving sheriff, Madeline as a respected rancher and eventually a member of the Territorial Council advocating for women's rights. Their homestead expanded into one of the most prosperous ranches in the region, employing many who had once worked for Holloway but now found honest employment under fairer conditions. And on their 20th anniversary, Thomas presented Madeline with a gift, a painting commissioned from an artist in Helena. It depicted a cabin in a storm, a wounded man at the door, and a determined woman with a shotgun and a lantern. "To remind us," he said as they stood before it, "of how it all began." Madeline leaned against his shoulder, marveling at how clearly the artist had captured that fateful night. "I sometimes wonder," she mused, "what would have happened if I hadn't gone out to investigate that noise." "Providence," Thomas replied, using the name they'd given to the mare that had carried them through so much. "Some things are meant to be, come rain or bullets or whatever else life throws our way." Madeline smiled up at the man who had changed her life, still handsome despite the silver threading through his dark hair, his blue eyes still bright when they looked at her. "I'd take you in again," she said softly. "Every time." Thomas's arm tightened around her waist. "And I'd still listen when you told me I wasn't going anywhere." In the painting, as in their memories, the rain continued to fall, and blood still stained the wounded man's shirt. But beyond that moment of crisis, invisible to the eye but known to their hearts, lay the future they had built together, a love story written across the Montana Territory, one day at a time.